Hello, friends. I imagine many of you have had a moment when you looked back on your life and thought, that was it, that was my best year. Or maybe the opposite thought crossed your mind, I'm still waiting for my best years to arrive. Perhaps you have noticed that some years of your life simply flowed easily. Doors opened, people showed up at the right moment, and your own energy felt aligned with what you wanted. And then there were other years that felt heavier, slower, full of obstacles that seemed to appear out of nowhere. You may have wondered whether this is just the randomness of life or whether there is some kind of rhythm underneath it, a pattern that could actually be understood ahead of time. This is exactly the question we are going to sit with today. In numerology, there is a way of looking at your life not as one continuous flat line, but as a series of cycles, each with its own number, its own mood, its own purpose. And by understanding where you are in that cycle right now, you may get a much clearer sense of when your best period of life is likely to begin, what it might feel like when it arrives, and just as importantly, how to recognize it instead of letting it pass by unnoticed. Because sometimes the best period of your life does not come with fireworks, it comes quietly, and if you're not paying attention, you might not realize you're already standing in the middle of it. So today we will walk through what numerologists often call the personal year cycle, a 9-year rhythm that repeats throughout your life. And we will look at each of the 9 years one at a time to understand what kind of energy it carries, how it tends to show up in ordinary life, work, relationships, and mood, and which of these years is often described as the most fertile, the most abundant, the one where things tend to bloom. I will also share how you can find out, in a very simple way, which year you are in right now. Let's begin gently, the way we always do, with the foundation. In most systems of numerology, your personal year is calculated by taking the month and day of your birth and adding them to the current calendar year, then reducing that sum down to a single digit between 1 and 9. For example, if your birthday is March 14th, you would add 3 for March and 14 for the day to the digits of the current year, and keep reducing until you land on one number. That number tells you which year of the 9-year cycle you are currently living through. It is a simple enough calculation that you could do it on the back of an envelope, but the meaning behind the number is where things become genuinely interesting. The 9-year cycle is often compared to the changing of seasons or to the stages of planting, growing, harvesting, and resting that farmers have followed for generations. Nothing in nature blooms all year round, and in this view, neither do we. A personal year 1 is different in flavor from a personal year 5, which is different again from a personal year 8. None of them are bad years in an absolute sense, and none of them are automatically the best. But there is one point in the cycle that many numerologists single out as the time when the seeds planted earlier tend to ripen into something visible, and we will get there in due course. For now, let us walk through the 9 years, one by one, the way you might walk through the rooms of a house you're slowly getting to know. The first year of the cycle carries the vibration of beginnings. If you find yourself in a personal year 1, you may notice a restlessness, a quiet urge to start something new, whether that is a job, a relationship, a health routine, or simply a new way of arranging your daily life. This is often the year when people move to a new city, begin studying something they always wanted to learn, or simply feel the pull to reinvent themselves in some small way. It is a year that favors initiative. If you have an idea you have been sitting on, this is often the year when planting that first seed feels most natural, because the energy of the year supports starting over. But there is another side to this. A personal year 1 can also feel lonely, because beginnings by their nature often happen before the support systems around them are built. You might feel like you're standing at the edge of something with no one quite understanding yet what you're building. That loneliness is not a sign that something is wrong, it is simply part of what a beginning feels like from the inside. The second year shifts the tone considerably. Where the first year is about individual action, the second year is about relationship, patience, and cooperation. You may notice that this year asks you to slow down, to listen more than you speak, to nurture partnerships rather than launch new projects. People often find that personal year 2 is when significant relationships deepen, when a partnership at work becomes more collaborative, or when family bonds require more attention and gentleness. This can be a wonderful year for healing rifts, for quiet emotional growth, for learning the value of patience. But the shadow side of a 2-year is that it can feel frustratingly slow if you're hoping for quick results. Plans made in year 1 may seem to stall here, not because they have failed, but because they are quietly gathering the support they will need later. If you were expecting speed and instead find yourself waiting, This is often simply where you are in the rhythm, not evidence that things have gone wrong. The third year brings a lighter, more expressive energy. This is often described as a year of creativity, communication, and social expansion. You may notice yourself wanting to write, to speak up more in meetings, to reconnect with old friends, to laugh more, to take a class in something purely for pleasure rather than for career advancement. Many people experience a personal year 3 as a kind of emotional exhale after the more introspective second year. It is a good time for anything involving self-expression. Whether that is a creative project, a social event you host, or simply allowing yourself to enjoy life more openly. The shadow side here is a tendency towards scattered energy. With so many appealing directions, some people find it hard to focus, spending the year lightly touching many things without deepening into any one of them. If you notice your enthusiasm is high, but your follow-through is low during a 3-year, that imbalance is common, and simply naming it can help you choose 1 or 2 things to actually finish. The 4th year is often called the year of foundation and structure. After the lightness of the 3rd year, the 4th year asks for discipline. This is frequently when people focus on practical matters, organizing finances, taking care of the body, dealing with paperwork, home repairs, or steady, unglamorous work that builds something durable. You may notice a stronger desire for routine, for order, for getting your physical environment in shape. This is often a supportive year for anyone wanting to build real infrastructure under their life, whether that means saving money, establishing healthier habits, or simply decluttering a home that has become chaotic. The shadow side of the 4th year is that it can feel restrictive, even a little joyless if you resist its slower pace. Some people fight against this year, wanting more excitement, and end up feeling stuck rather than recognizing that they are quietly laying groundwork for something that has not yet become visible. A concrete example: someone spending a personal year 4 finally organizing years of financial paperwork or finishing a home renovation that had been left half done often looks back later and realizes that unglamorous work made the following years possible. The 5th year introduces change, freedom, and unpredictability. If the 4th year was about building walls, the 5th year is about testing whether you actually want to stay inside them. You may notice a surge of restlessness, a desire to travel, to change your routine, to meet new people, or even to end situations that no longer fit who you are becoming. This is often a year when people switch jobs, move homes, begin or end relationships, or simply feel a pull toward variety after a period of structure. It can be an exciting, expansive year, full of unexpected opportunities and new connections. But there is another side to this. The same energy that brings freedom can also bring chaos if there is no anchor at all. Some people find that a 5-year without any grounding from the previous year's work becomes scattered or even destabilizing, full of changes made impulsively rather than thoughtfully. The lesson many numerologists point to here is that freedom feels best when it grows out of a foundation rather than replacing the need for one entirely. The 6th year turns attention toward home, family, and responsibility, often in a warmer and more relational way than the 4th year's practical focus. You may notice this is when people marry, have children, take on caregiving roles for parents, or simply find themselves more emotionally invested in their close relationships and their living space. This is frequently described as a nurturing year, one where love, commitment, and domestic life take center stage. Many people feel most at home during a personal year 6, literally and figuratively drawn to improving their living space, hosting gatherings, or deepening bonds with the people closest to them. The shadow expression of this year is the risk of overgiving, of taking on so much responsibility for others that your own needs get pushed aside. Someone in a 6-year might find themselves exhausted from caretaking, having said yes to every family obligation without leaving room for their own rest. Recognizing this tendency early can help balance the generosity of this year with some healthy boundaries. The 7th year is quieter, more introspective, and is often associated with reflection, study, and inner development rather than outward achievement. You may notice a pull towards solitude during this year, a desire to read more, to think deeply, to question your beliefs, or to step back from constant socializing in favor of quiet time. Many people describe personal year 7 as a kind of retreat, even if life circumstances do not literally allow for one. It can be a wonderful time for spiritual exploration, for therapy or self-reflection, for reassessing whether your current path actually matches your values. The shadow side is that it can feel isolating or even a little melancholic if you resist the slower inward pull and keep trying to force outward productivity. Someone who spends a 7-year fighting the need for rest, insisting on maintaining the same busy pace as previous years, often ends up feeling depleted rather than renewed. This year rewards patience with your own inner process, even when the outer world seems to be asking for constant motion. Now we come to the 8th year, and this is the one that many numerologists point to as the harvest point of the entire 9-year cycle, the year most closely associated with visible achievement, recognition, and material reward. If the earlier years were about planting, building, connecting, and reflecting, the 8th year is often when the results of all that quiet labor become tangible. You may notice career advancement, financial growth, public recognition, or simply a sense that your efforts are finally paying off in a way you can see and measure. This is frequently described as one of the most powerful years in the entire cycle, a time when ambition, structure, and follow-through come together with real-world results. People often report significant income growth, career milestones, or in some cases, receiving formal recognition for work they have been doing quietly for years. It is important to say clearly that this is not a guarantee, and it is not the same for everyone. Someone who spent their 4th year avoiding the necessary structural work, or their 2nd year neglecting important relationships, may find their 8th year harvest smaller than someone who tended those earlier stages carefully. The 8th year tends to reflect back the quality of what was planted rather than creating success out of nothing. There is also a shadow side worth naming honestly. The same energy that brings material reward can also bring intensity, overwork, or an overemphasis on status and achievement at the expense of rest and relationships. Someone deeply immersed in an 8 years momentum might find themselves working longer hours, chasing the next milestone, and only later realizing they have neglected the people closest to them. The abundance of this year is real, but it asks to be handled with some awareness, so that success does not come at too high a personal cost. If someone asks specifically when their best period of life is likely to begin, many numerologists would point toward this 8th year, or more precisely, toward the stretch of time leading into it and just following it, since energy in these cycles tends to build gradually rather than switching on overnight. The years leading up to an 8, particularly a well-used 4 and a well-used 6, often create the conditions that make the 8 so fruitful, and the momentum from a strong 8th year frequently carries forward into the 9th year and even into the beginning of the next cycle's 1st year. So rather than picturing your best period as a single isolated year, it may be more accurate to picture it as a season, a few years clustered around this harvest point, where the quiet, consistent work of the earlier years becomes visible and rewarding. That brings us to the 9th year, which closes the cycle. This is a year of completion, release, and letting go, often described as an emotional and reflective time similar to autumn when leaves fall so that new growth can happen later. You may notice endings during a personal year 9, relationships that have run their course concluding, jobs ending, living situations changing, or simply an inner sense that certain chapters need to close. This can be a genuinely healing year if you allow the letting go to happen naturally, clearing space for the fresh start of the next personal year 1. Many people use a 9 year to forgive old grievances, finish long-delayed projects, or simply tie up loose ends they have been avoiding. The shadow side is a tendency towards sadness or nostalgia, a difficulty releasing what needs to end, holding too tightly to a relationship, a job, or an identity that has already run its natural course during a 9 year, often creates unnecessary suffering, because the energy of this year is fundamentally about release, whether we cooperate with it or not. It is worth pausing here to say something important about how these 9 years relate to one another, because none of them stand completely alone. The whole point of a cycle is that each year depends, at least in part, on what happened in the years before it. A personal year 8 arriving after a poorly used 4, where structural work was avoided, or a neglected 6, where relationships were left unattended, will still bring some opportunity, but it may feel less abundant than it could have. This is one of the more grounded, common sense aspects of the whole system. Harvest depends on planting. If you skip the planting years or resist them, the harvest year does not disappear, but its fruit may be thinner. This is why numerologists often encourage people not to wait passively for their 8th year to arrive, but to use the earlier years intentionally, the way a gardener prepares soil long before anything visible appears above ground. It is also worth saying plainly that this system is not a guarantee, and it should not be treated as a fixed prediction of exactly what will happen in your life. Personal circumstances, choices, relationships, health, and simple chance all play their part alongside whatever cyclical pattern numerology describes. Two people in the exact same personal year 8 can have very different experiences because their starting points, their effort, and their circumstances differ. What this system offers is less a prophecy and more a kind of seasonal awareness, a way of understanding that different years ask different things of you, and that recognizing which season you are in can help you respond to it more wisely, rather than fighting against a rhythm that was never meant to move at a constant speed. There is another layer worth mentioning briefly, which is that these personal years exist inside a larger life path number, the single digit calculated from your full birth date that some numerologists consider your overarching life theme. Someone whose life path number is strongly connected to material achievement may experience their personal year 8 with particular intensity, while someone whose life path leans more toward relationships or creativity might experience that same 8 years abundance showing up more through recognition in their close relationships or their creative work, rather than purely through career or income. This is one reason two people can be in the identical personal year and describe completely different experiences. The personal year sets the general weather, but your life path number colors how that weather actually feels to you personally. If you are curious about which personal year you are in right now, take a quiet moment sometime today, add your birth month and day to the digits of the current year, reduce the total down to a single number between 1 and 9, and simply sit with what that number suggests. If you find yourself in a 1 or a 5, this may be a natural time for beginnings and change, and pushing too hard against stillness might feel more uncomfortable than useful. If you're in a 4 or a 6, this may be a season for quiet structural work and relational care, even if it does not feel particularly exciting in the moment. And if you find yourself already in an 8, you may want to notice whether the harvest already feels present in your life, even in modest ways, rather than waiting for some dramatic single event to mark its arrival. Sometimes the best period of life does not announce itself loudly. It simply accumulates, one recognized opportunity, one healthy relationship, one small success at a time, until you look back and realize that this quiet accumulation was in fact the very thing you had been waiting for. So, friends, if you take one thing from today's exploration, let it be this gentle reframing. Your best period of life may not be a distant, dramatic event waiting somewhere far in the future. It may be a season built gradually out of ordinary years, some of them quiet, some of them slow, some of them lonely, each contributing something necessary to a harvest that eventually becomes visible. Rather than asking only when will my best period begin, it can be just as useful to ask what am I planting right now that a future season will depend on. Both questions matter. And numerology at its best is simply a language for holding them together. I would invite you, over the next few days, to notice where your own life currently sits in relation to everything we discussed today. Think back over recent years. Calculate a few of your recent personal years if you're curious, and see whether the themes we described, beginnings, partnership, expression, structure, change, home, reflection, harvest, and release, seem to match what you actually lived through. Many people find this small exercise surprisingly clarifying, almost like being handed a calendar that was quietly running underneath their life all along, waiting to be noticed. If this topic resonated with you, you might also enjoy exploring your life path number more deeply sometime, since it works alongside everything we discussed today and adds a great deal of personal color to how each of these 9 years actually feels for you specifically. That might be a natural direction for us to explore together in a future conversation. That is all for today. I hope this was interesting for you and that it gave you a gentler way of thinking about timing, patience, and the seasons of your own life. Please subscribe to the channel. I will be very glad to have you here.